The wind was sharp that morning, whispering through the brittle grass like a warning. Dust clung to the horizon, and the sun peeked red over the distant mesas, casting long shadows over the Oregon Trail. What was left of the wagon caravan moved slow, strained under broken wheels and broken spirits. Among them was Clara Whitlock, a 16-year-old girl who had seen more sorrow than most men twice her age. Her eyes, milky with blindness since birth, had never seen the sweeping plains nor the jagged peaks to the west. But she felt them, in the sun on her face, the cold grit in the wind, and the ache of silence when people no longer spoke to her directly. She had always been an afterthought in the caravan, a burden some muttered behind her back. Her father, a former preacher-turned-settler, had died weeks earlier from fever, buried shallow under stone and willow root. Her mother, worn thin by grief and hunger, followed only days after, taken by the same wasting sickness. Clara was left in the care of strangers who barely remembered her name, and by the time the trail turned hard, no food, little water, oxen dropping dead in their yokes, she became less than a person to them. Just one more mouth. When they left her, it was not with cruelty, but with the quiet desperation of the dying. One morning she awoke alone beneath a canvas scrap, the air still smelling of burnt bacon grease. The wagons had moved on, the wheel tracks shallow in the hard ground, already being swallowed by dust. They had left her a half-empty canteen and 2 stale biscuits. Nothing else. Clara didn't cry. There was no one to cry to, and the tears had dried up long ago. She sat very still, listening to the wind, trying to decide which way the world tilted. Her hands trembled as she broke one biscuit in half, feeling its crumbling texture, then tucked both pieces in the small cloth pouch sewn inside her coat. The canteen sloshed faintly. She tilted it, took one sip. She'd have to make it last. Somehow. She didn't know where she was or which way the trail ran. Every step could be toward safety or straight into death. But staying meant dying slow, alone and forgotten. So she walked. Slowly at first, hand outstretched like she was trying to read the land with her fingers. Her boots scuffed dry grass, kicked stones. She followed the wind, not because she thought it would help, but because it felt like the only thing still moving in this dead country. 2 days passed like that. Her lips cracked, feet blistered, and once she tripped hard over a gopher hole and lay there for a long time, too tired to move. She began humming old hymns her father once sang, not for faith but for the rhythm, for something that felt like it belonged to her. Then came the hoofbeats. She froze, heart climbing into her throat. The sound was unmistakable, hoarse, moving light and steady, not a settler's plod but something quicker, more sure. A moment later she felt the presence more than heard it. Breathing close. Then silence. "White girl," a voice said. Low, steady. Careful English, like it was not the speaker's first tongue. "Why are you alone here?" She didn't answer right away, afraid to speak, afraid to breathe. "Did they leave you?" the voice asked again. "Your people?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." A long silence. Then the sound of someone dismounting, the creak of leather, a footfall on dry grass. She flinched when he got close. "I will not hurt you," he said. "But this is not a place for the blind or the lost." "Then leave me be," she whispered. He didn't move. "You will be dead by nightfall. Do you want to die here like a dog?" Her lips trembled. "I don't want to die." "Then stand." She pushed herself up, limbs shaking. He reached for her arm, guiding it gently to his horse's mane. "You will ride. I will lead." And just like that, Clara's life split into 2 parts, before the Cheyenne man and after. He never gave his name and she never asked, though she later called him Hawk in her thoughts, for the way he saw everything. His presence was quiet, his movements careful, as though he'd long ago learned to take only what the land offered and leave no trace. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words had weight. They traveled north at first, avoiding where the trail likely lay. "Too many hungry men there," he said. "Desperate men." Clara rode with one hand on the saddle horn, the other holding tightly to Hawk's belt. She couldn't see, but she imagined the land through smell and sound, pine needles baking in sun, the distant call of a mourning dove, the crunch of hooves on stone. They traveled mostly by dusk and dawn, resting in midday heat under rocky outcroppings or in stands of cottonwood. Hawk knew where water hid, how to catch rabbits with snares, how to gut and cook over fire with nothing but a knife and a flat rock. She learned to listen to the earth as he did. When he paused, she paused. When he urged the horse forward, she followed without question. In time, she stopped feeling like a burden and more like something purposeful, like the journey needed her as much as she needed it. Still, not all was peace. One night, as they camped near an abandoned trapper's shack, Clara awoke to the sound of voices. Low, menacing in English, she froze listening. "Smoke," one said. "Someone's here." Another voice, sharper. "Could be Injuns. Or a settler fool enough to light a fire." Clara's heart pounded. She reached out, but Hawk was already gone, vanished into the night like a ghost. She curled into the shadows, praying they wouldn't find her. But they did. A heavy boot thudded beside her, and a calloused hand grabbed her shoulder. "Well, what've we got here?" the man said, breath reeking of tobacco and rot. "Girl's blind. Ain't that a waste?" Another voice joined him. "Could fetch something for her if she's pure." She struggled, kicking, but he held tight. Then came a sound, a hiss of air and the sickening thwunk of something hard meeting flesh. The man above her cried out, then fell. A second scream was cut short. When she dared to lift her head, both men lay dead or dying, and Hawk stood over them, bloody knife in hand, his face a mask of silent fury. "They would have hurt you," he said simply, wiping the blade on one man's coat. "You sleep now. I will bury them." The next day neither of them spoke of it. But the world seemed changed, heavier. Clara realized that every step westward wasn't just a move toward hope. It was a gamble, each mile weighted with danger and doubt. She didn't know what future lay ahead, but she understood now, truly, that survival was more than endurance. It was choices. Hard ones. That night, as they camped near a stream swollen from snowmelt, Hawk finally spoke of himself. "My people used to roam from the Bighorn Mountains to the Platte," he said. "Now the white men build houses where buffalo walked. Rail lines where deer drank. Why help me then?" Clara asked. He didn't answer for a long time. "You are blind," he said at last, "but not in the way most are." She thought on that long into the night. They traveled for many more days, slipping through lands few dared cross, always moving with purpose. Clara no longer feared what she couldn't see. She trusted Hawk's eyes, his instincts, his silence. And in that trust, something new began to take root. Not just survival, but a kind of strength she'd never known. And somewhere ahead, over the next ridge or the next after that, a place waited for them. A place where a blind girl and a Cheyenne scout might be more than what the world expected them to be. The weather turned mean by the 5th day. Clouds rolled in like a slow herd, thick and gray, stealing the warmth from the air. Hawk said little, but Clara could feel the change in his posture. He guided the horse with more urgency, the reins taut in his hand. That evening he didn't make a fire. "Rain's coming," he said, voice low. "Cold one. We ride till we find cover." Clara nodded, pulling her coat tighter around her. She could feel the air dampening, the smell of wet earth rising before a drop even fell. Her hands gripped the saddle horn as the horse picked its way down a narrow ravine. The wind howled through it like an angry spirit, and for a moment, Clara wondered if Hawk was lost. But then he stopped, dismounted, and said, "Here." He led her down off the horse and into a narrow cut in the stone, almost a cave but not quite. The rock curved over them enough to shield from the worst of the storm. Hawk tied the horse under a patch of scrub oak and laid their packs down in the driest corner. The rain started just after nightfall. Not a soft sprinkle, but a hard, steady curtain that beat against the stone and filled the dry creek bed outside. Clara sat wrapped in her blanket, listening. Hawk moved around silently, always alert. She found comfort in that, his constant motion, his certainty. But the cold came anyway. It wormed through the stone, curled around her bones. She began to shiver. Hawk noticed. "You'll die like that," he said. Then, with little ceremony, he sat beside her and wrapped his blanket around them both. His body was warm, solid as tree bark. She didn't protest. "I've never known a storm like this," she said after a long silence. "I have," Hawk replied. "In the mountains when the sky turns white and wind makes no sound. Men freeze on their feet. Did you ever lose someone like that?" Pause. Then, "My brother. He was younger, stubborn, wanted to chase elk before the snow passed. He didn't come back." Clara didn't speak for a long time. The rain filled the silence. "I lost my father to fever," she finally said. "Then my mother. The others barely noticed. It's like, once they were gone, I didn't matter anymore." "You matter now," Hawk said. The words hit her with a force she hadn't expected. She turned her head toward him, reaching for his hand. He let her take it. "I can't see your face," she said softly, "but I believe you." By morning the rain had passed, leaving the earth slick and glistening. They moved on, slower now, the horse cautious on the muddy slopes. Clara's hearing sharpened with each passing day, catching the flutter of birds, the shift in wind direction, the change in ground beneath the hooves. Hawk taught her how to listen better, how to hear the difference between a squirrel and a snake, how to tell when a stream ran near or far. One morning they came across a burned-out homestead. Smoke still curled from blackened beams, the ground littered with charred debris. The smell of scorched wood and something worse clung to the air. Hawk dismounted and walked the perimeter. Clara waited, tense. When he returned, his voice was grim. Raiders, likely white men, took what they wanted, killed the rest. Clara swallowed hard. Were there children? Yes. They left quickly. That night, Hawk told her about the Comancheros, bands of men who preyed on the weak, often pretending to be scouts or trappers. They traded guns, whiskey, flesh. They had no code. If we see them, he said, we do not speak. We run. Or we fight. Clara dreamed of fire that night, of screams and horses. When she woke, Hawk was sitting up, knife across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. Trouble didn't wait long. 2 days later, they passed through a canyon where the air felt too still, too quiet. No birdsong. No wind. Hawk slowed the horse, his eyes scanning the ridges. Then came the crack of a rifle. It hit the dirt inches from the horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing Clara, but Hawk held fast. Another shot rang out, closer. Down, he shouted, dragging Clara off the saddle and into the rocks. She hit the ground hard, scraping her palms, but followed as Hawk pulled her behind a boulder. Shouting echoed from above, male voices laughing. Thought I saw something moving down there, one yelled. Looks like we got a squaw man and his girl. Clara's breath caught. What do we do? Hawk didn't answer. He took out his knife, then his old flintlock. One shot, maybe two if it hadn't fouled. Stay low. If I run, you run the other way. Do not stop. No, Clara whispered. Don't leave me. He looked at her, eyes unreadable. Then he placed something in her hands, a pouch. Black powder, he said. If they get close, throw it in the fire pit. It will blind them. I can't. You must. He stood and vanished up the slope before she could protest. She waited. The shouting got louder. Closer. Then came a scream. A gunshot. Another scream. The sound of rocks tumbling. One of the men stumbled into view, bleeding from the shoulder, eyes wide. Clara heard him breathing hard, then heard him cock a pistol. He didn't see her at first. Then he did. Little blind bitch, he snarled. She fumbled with the pouch, pulled the flap. The man stepped forward, gun raised. She flung the contents at his feet and struck flint against rock. A spark leapt, powder caught. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough. Fire and smoke erupted in his face. He screamed, dropped the gun, stumbled backward. Then Hawk was there. And it was over. They didn't speak much that night. But when Clara finally slept, it was with the knowledge that she was not helpless. Not anymore. The land changed after that. Greener. Trees grew taller, the air smelled of pine and sap. Hawk said they were nearing the mountains. A village lay ahead, Cheyenne he hoped. Or friendly traders. Will they accept me? Clara asked. He was silent for a long time. They will if I speak for you, he said. Then speak for me, she whispered. By now, her hands were calloused, her ears sharp. She could walk beside the horse without stumbling, read the sky and the way birds flew. She no longer dreamed of being left behind. Now she dreamed of valleys and rivers, and the warmth of Hawk's voice in the dark. Snow touched the mountain tips like ash from a dying fire as Hawk and Clara reached the high country. The wind there wasn't cruel, only constant, whispering down from the peaks, stirring pine branches, carrying the scent of cold stone and old storms. They followed narrow trails worn smooth by elk and bear, Hawk's moccasins quiet on the earth, Clara's boots steady beside his. The land was wilder, lonelier, but Clara found herself less afraid of that than she'd once been of men. They traveled mostly in silence now, not because there was nothing to say, but because some silences were understood. Hawk had begun speaking of the people they might find, his people. He'd not seen a Cheyenne camp in 2 winters, but he knew their patterns, their seasons. They move with the land, he told her. If they are near, we'll find them. Clara's heart tightened at the thought. She imagined being among strangers again, but this time not as a burden or a leftover. She didn't know what they'd make of her, pale, blind, quiet, but she knew what she'd make of them, a chance. The journey turned harder with the altitude. Some mornings Clara woke with blood in her mouth from the dry air. Her feet cracked in the cold, her joints ached. Hawk gave her bitter herbs for the pain and watched her closely. He rarely slept more than a few hours, always listening, always alert. One night as they camped beside a frozen creek, Clara asked him, "Will we stay if we find them?" He was silent. "I would like to stay," she added, her voice soft. "I'm tired of running." "It depends," Hawk said after a time. "On what they believe. On what they've lost." They were close the next day when they found the broken feathers. They were staked into the ground beside a trail, 6 of them, black-tipped, arranged in a fan. Hawk stopped dead when he saw them. "Cheyenne?" Clara asked. "Yes," Hawk said, voice low. "But not a welcome sign." He knelt beside the feathers, examining the way they were tied. "This is mourning," he said. "A warning. The village ahead has seen death." Clara felt the chill even before the wind touched her skin. They pressed on, more cautious now. Near dusk, Hawk spotted the smoke, a thin curl above the trees. Not enough for a fire, more like cooking smoke. He motioned for silence and guided Clara through the underbrush, each step careful. The camp was there, just past a rise, a cluster of lodges tucked between pine trunks, horses penned near a frozen stream. But it was quiet. Too quiet. They moved closer, and Clara could feel the stillness in her teeth. Hawk held her back as he approached the nearest lodge. A shape lay by the fire pit, still, covered in a buffalo hide. "Wait here," Hawk whispered. She listened as his footsteps vanished into the snow. The silence grew thick, pressing against her ears. She could hear her own breathing, rapid now, shallow. Then a voice rose, high, wild, and female. Then another. Then weeping. Hawk returned minutes later with a woman in tow, her voice hard with grief. Clara couldn't understand her words, but she knew sorrow when she heard it. "She is widow of my cousin," Hawk said. "This camp was attacked last moon. Soldiers, they say. Drunk. Came at night." Clara's fists clenched. "They killed them?" "Many. The old. The sick. Took food. Horses. Her son." "What now?" Hawk turned to Clara. "Now we help. If they will let us." They stayed. The days that followed were full of small, quiet things. Clara helped gather wood, learned to scrape hides, learned the feel of woven baskets and the scent of different roots. The children were wary of her at first, her pale skin and sightless eyes strange to them. But she sang when she worked, old hymns at first, then wordless tunes her mother used to hum, and the children crept closer. One brave girl took Clara's hand and led her to a frozen pond. Clara slipped, laughed, and the others laughed too. She wasn't invisible anymore. At night, around the small lodge they were given, she and Hawk sat close. He began teaching her Cheyenne words, her tongue slow to shape them, but his patience endless. When she called him Tahino, he only nodded. One day, the widow approached with Hawk beside her. Clara stood to greet them. "They want you to join the morning song," Hawk translated. "They say you carry grief in your voice." Clara didn't hesitate. She sang as the sun set behind the ridgeline, her voice winding between the trees, low and aching. She sang for the lost, the forgotten, the ones left behind. And when she finished, the old ones nodded. They said nothing, but Hawk told her later they had accepted her. Still, peace didn't last. The tracks were found 3 mornings later, horses not wild. Too many. Too deep. Hawk's face went still when he saw them. "Soldiers again," he said. "Or raiders pretending to be." They circled wide, watching. The village prepared to move. Hawk gathered supplies in haste. Clara could feel the tension in the air, tasted in the dry bread they packed. She offered to help lead the horses. The widow gave her a talisman, small, carved bone, warm in her palm. For protection. They traveled north again into the deeper forest, where cliffs rose like giants and rivers cut through stone. The children grew quiet, the old ones moved slower. Hawk ranged ahead, eyes scanning for signs. Clara listened, every step a prayer. Then one night they came. Gunfire split the trees like thunder. Screams followed. Clara was jostled, grabbed, pulled. She called for Hawk, but the voices were too many. The sounds too loud. A hand closed on her wrist. She twisted, kicked. "It's me," Hawk said, voice steady even in the chaos. She clung to him as they ran. Behind them, fire began to rise, another lodge burning. She smelled pitch and smoke. They ran until her legs gave out. Then Hawk carried her, through cold, through dark, through a silence broken only by her sobs. When they stopped, she didn't know where they were, some crevice in the rocks hidden under brush. Others were there too. Survivors. But the village was gone. That night, Hawk held her close. He said nothing and she didn't ask. They had lost again. But they were not alone. Clara lay with her ear against his chest, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. They would go on. They always did. Snow clung stubbornly to the ridgelines as spring stirred in the valley below, softening the edges of the land. The small band of survivors huddled in a hidden glade, a forgotten pocket of the wilderness where no cavalry patrol would bother looking. It was a place of silence, save for wind and the occasional crack of a branch beneath the weight of something larger than a man. There were 17 left. Clara counted them by voice, by footstep, by the rhythm of their breathing at night. Some were children, quiet and stunned. Others were elders, worn and mournful. Hawk moved among them like a shadow, silent, firm, offering what little comfort he could in the way of dry meat, warm fire, and watchful eyes. She stayed close to the widow, helping bind wounds, fetching water, singing low in the mornings when the children refused to rise. The Cheyenne tongue had come slowly, but now it clung to her, warm and strange. She was not fluent, but she was no longer a stranger. Still, silence followed her like a second shadow, whispers of fear, memories of burning lodges, the echo of boots in the night. It was Hawk who first spoke of leaving. "They will not stop," he said, his voice barely above the rustling trees. "Soldiers, raiders, one and the same now. They hunt where they think no law sees." Clara sat beside him, hands wrapped around a warm stone. "Then where do we go?" "West. Beyond the high rivers. I have kin there, old blood, maybe friendly." "Maybe?" He looked at her, the fire catching the deep-set lines in his face. "It is all we have." They left 2 days later. A handful stayed behind, the elder with the shattered leg, a mother with fevered twins. Hawk did not argue. He gave them what food he could, spoke blessings in Cheyenne and turned to the trail. The journey west was brutal. The thaw had not reached the mountains and snow lay in thick, crusted patches across the passes. The horses struggled. The children grew weaker. Clara bled from cracked feet and broken nails but said nothing. She leaned on Hawk's arm when the path grew steep, followed the sound of his steps when she couldn't feel the trail. Her blindness had become an odd strength. Where others were disoriented by white fog and blinding snow glare, she moved steadily, unaffected by the chaos of color. They crossed 3 rivers in the span of a week. The third nearly killed them. The ice broke as they forded it, sweeping one child under. Hawk dove without hesitation, pulling the girl out by her braid, coughing and pale. That night they lost 2 horses and half their kindling. Yet they pressed on. Spring, when it finally came, was cruel. The snow melted fast, swelling streams and softening earth. The horses sank into muck. Every step was a gamble. It was Hawk's wound they hadn't seen coming. A sharp cry from the front. Clara spun at the sound, ears trained. A low grunt, then the thud of a body. He'd stepped wrong on a shale shelf. The rock gave. When they reached him, his leg was twisted beneath him, bleeding through the buckskin. "It's broken," Clara said, her hands gentle, sure. He nodded once. "Help me sit." The others gathered wood. Clara splinted the leg using what she remembered from helping the old widow. Hawk gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. The pain was deep, the kind that burrows into a man's soul. That night, Clara fed him willow bark tea and stroked his brow with a damp cloth. "You'll ride," she said. "I'll lead." "You're blind." "I'm not lost." He stared at her for a long time. Then he nodded. So she led. Day after day, hand on the bridle, stick in the dirt. She listened for birds, watched for warmth in the wind. The children trusted her now. She sang to them as they walked. When the wind grew too loud or the forest too quiet, she stood still and waited for the earth to tell her what to do. And then one morning they smelled smoke, but not the acrid smoke of destruction. This was cooking. Cedar. Corn. Voices followed, soft, distant. Not English. A scout appeared an hour later. Clara heard his breath before she heard his feet. Hawk called out in Cheyenne. There was silence. Then an answer. When the man stepped into camp, he was older, face leathered by sun, eyes bright. "Your cousin," Hawk said. The man looked at Clara, then at the others, and nodded. "He will take us." The camp was high in the pine foothills. A village of sorts, though more permanent than the one they'd fled. Bark lodges, clay ovens, smokehouses. No soldiers. No law. Here, finally, there was rest. Hawk's leg healed slowly but well. Clara helped him walk at first. Then he walked alone. The children played again, though not without wariness. The widow found another woman who'd lost a husband. They spoke of making baskets together, of planting corn. Clara sat by the river one morning, her hands buried in cold mud, shaping bowls as she'd been taught. Hawk came and sat beside her. "They ask if we will stay." She turned her face toward the breeze. "Do you want to?" He didn't answer immediately. "I've run too long," he said finally. "Buried too many. Watched too much go to ash." She nodded. "Then we stay." That night there was a fire circle. Clara stood, eyes closed, and sang. Not in English. Not entirely in Cheyenne. A mix of both. A song of loss, of found things, of trails that ended and ones that began. Her voice carried through the trees, across the water, into the stars. And when she sat down, Hawk took her hand. "We are not alone," he said. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." Summer poured into the hills like golden syrup, slow and warm, softening the sharp edges that had kept them wary for so long. The earth bloomed in quiet ways, wildflowers in the bends of trails, trout flashing in the deeper pools, bees whispering between stalks of milkweed. Time, which once had moved like a fleeing animal, now lingered. Clara had grown into the rhythm of the camp like a tree grows into a bend in the wind. Her hands had learned the weave of baskets, the shaping of clay, the way different herbs smelled before the storm. Children followed her now, not out of fear or pity, but out of curiosity and affection. They called her names that meant sings to the sky, and stone that warms. Her blindness was no longer a wound, it had become something else, an anchor, a story, even a kind of power. She could still feel fear, of course, but it no longer ruled her. What ruled her now was the simple, sturdy knowledge that she belonged. And Hawk was healing too. He walked now without pain, though his limp stayed with him, a quiet echo of what they'd been through. He spent time with his cousin's people, shared old stories, taught young men how to track and move like shadow. His voice had become deeper somehow, or maybe it was just steadier. He no longer looked over his shoulder at every crack of a twig. One evening, as fireflies blinked low over the grass, Hawk came to Clara with a question folded carefully into his hands. "There is a place west of here," he said, "by the high valley where elk winter. Flat land. Rich soil. No soldiers. No maps." She waited. "I want to build there. A home. Not a camp. Not a place to run from." A slow breath passed between them. "And I want you there. With me." Clara tilted her face toward his voice. "You sure?" He stepped close, took her hands. "I was lost when I found you. I didn't know it yet. You gave me a way forward." She felt the calluses on his fingers, the scars. She thought of the nights by the fire, the weight of silence, the sound of her own heart when he walked away and came back again. "Then yes," she said. The next days were full of quiet planning. The Cheyenne elders gave their blessing. Some offered to help raise the frame. Others gifted tools, dried meat, seeds, stories. They left with 2 horses, a cart, and a promise. The trail west was easier this time. They moved slow with purpose. Clara walked part of the way, rode part of it, and guided when Hawk couldn't see the trail well in dusk or fog. They found the valley by the end of the second week, flat and green, bordered by a curve of hills on one side and a tall line of poplars on the other. Hawk stood there for a long time, Clara's hand in his, the wind playing through the grass like a hymn. "This is it," he said simply. They built. Not fast, not with certainty, but with care. Hawk laid the beams with his cousin's help, drove posts into the earth until his hands bled. Clara shaped the walls of clay and straw, learned how to patch a roof, how to bury root vegetables against the freeze. At night, they slept under the stars, fire crackling low, and talked of what would come. Visitors found them. First a young couple from the old camp, seeking quiet. Then an older man who'd known Hawk's father. The trader. The tanner. A woman with a basket of dried apples and a quiet son. Slowly life returned, not the crowded life of towns and fences, but the wild life of shared labor and long silences. By autumn there were 3 homes in the valley. A garden. Smoke curling from chimneys. Children laughing again. Clara stood on the porch one morning, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. The chill had come, but not cruelly yet. She could smell frost in the wind. Hawk came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You hear that?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Birds?" "No. Quiet." She smiled. "I like quiet." That night they hosted a fire. Not for mourning. For stories. People gathered. Hawk told of the trail, of the snow, of the river that nearly took them. Clara told of the night she was left behind and the voice that found her in the dark. They laughed now. They cried. They passed a jug of strong drink. And when the stars turned cold and bright, Clara sang. Not for the dead. For the living. Her voice drifted high across the hills, carried by wind and firelight. And when she finished, there was only stillness, the kind that meant everyone was listening even if they had no words. In the months that followed, more came. Some stayed. Others moved on, changed by something they couldn't quite name. And Clara, blind but never broken, tended the garden, sang to the bees, and walked the edge of the creek by memory alone. One spring morning, she stood in the doorway as Hawk stepped down into the dew-wet grass. He turned, smiled, held out his hand. She took it without hesitation. They walked toward the fields side by side in no hurry at all, because they'd already survived the wilderness. Now they were learning how to live.